We're just going to give everyone about 30 seconds for them to be able to come into the meeting. Good evening and welcome to this webinar on housing. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm the Secretary of the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions. And before we get to a presentation and a question and answer session regarding the topic we're dealing with today, which is the housing issues that people are going to start confronting if they're not already confronting them here in New Mexico, I want to say thanks very, very much to Serge Martinez, a professor of law at the University of New Mexico, and Nicole Martinez, who is the director of the Mesilla Valley Community of Hope, one of the best housing organizations in the state of New Mexico. They're going to be giving short presentations on rental resources and the legal process that people are going to go through if they start having trouble paying their rent. But before we go to presentations with them, I would like to say that I'm immensely proud to introduce the Lieutenant Governor for the state of New Mexico, Howie Morales, who can give an introduction on the subject and talk a little about his role regarding housing in the state of New Mexico. So, Governor?
Thank you so much, Secretary McCamley. Thank you and your staff and the whole department for all the work that you're doing during this unprecedented times. I'd also like to thank the panelists who are here with us today, as well as the Mortgage Finance Authority, as I do sit on that board and work closely with them when we deal with issues and housing within the state of New Mexico. As you'll see today in the presentation that's given, you're going to have a lot of information that will hopefully answer some questions, but be part of a bigger discussion. And I think the leadership that you've shown, Secretary, and the department to help to guide people through these difficult times is extremely important. In the Mortgage Finance Authority, what we try to do is to make sure that we look at different opportunities and funding mechanisms that may be available to have people into the ultimate goal is to have people into housing. And I know how important that is for each one of us and what that means for stability and making sure that we have quality of life within the state of New Mexico. What we do see across the country is that we're in a crisis, and we see that there's an impact that's taking place even more so by COVID-19. I do want to personally thank some legislators who I know look at this and are taking this seriously and starting discussions on how this can be done. I want to thank Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino, Representative Angelico Rubio, and Representative Andrea Romero for their leadership and making sure that the policy piece, which I hope at some later time that we can get into more, having that discussion on the policy aspect of it, their leadership has been instrumental and will continue to be. As we continue to discuss what this means, we know that the impact of coronavirus has escalated already the crisis that we've had, not only in New Mexico, but across the country. And what we've seen, especially with many of the protections that have expired, and you'll hear more about that from the federal side and also in today's panel. And then you see the unemployment benefits that were there that have been cut, maybe even scaled back, we're not sure. But what we do know is that the impact that's going to take place, we see in some of the reports that are coming out by September, we see that there's going to be at least 30 million Americans who may be in jeopardy of being evicted. And we see the impact that that would have not only in our state, but across the country. So I'm grateful that we have this discussion and that you joined us and are able to share some insight and maybe some ideas that we can look towards as we continue to tackle this pandemic. We also see the importance of what education means. And for me, education and housing is so important, and they're tied together. And I say that because I know when you look at academic achievement and you look and see what takes place within a community, they're correlated. And making sure that you can have stable, safe housing, that place where a person can call home, that they have that in place, has more of an impact than in many of the in-class activities that take place. So I do want to make sure that we can connect the dots and recognize that this isn't just an issue from Workforce Solution or an issue that's dealing with affordable housing or homelessness. It's a much bigger issue that affects every single one of us. And I'm grateful that you have joined us here today to help us with this discussion and to have the ideas and the passion needed to make sure that we can have ultimately that American dream, that dream that we want for every New Mexican, is that home ownership. in that safe environment. So Secretary, thank you for allowing me to join in. On behalf of myself and Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, we're grateful for all of the work that's being done by each one of you across the state.
Thank you, Governor. Really appreciate you being here and you sticking around through the presentations and help answer any questions we might have at the end. Speaking of which, before we go to the slide deck that Stacy, our PIO, is going to bring up in a second, I just want to say a couple things. Number one, we are recording this, and this will be available on the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions YouTube site. So if you know of folks that might benefit from the information here, but can't be on tonight, please understand it will be recorded and available for public consumption. Secondly, if you do have a question, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please feel free to ask your question there. And if you have a very specific question regarding your situation, regarding your housing, if you want to put in that Q&A box, your name, your email, and where you're from, in addition to your question, that's not going to the public, but we'll have it, and we'll do the best we can to find the information that you need and get you a response as fast as we can. We're here to try to help provide all the information we can, and that's a good way to do it. So Stacy, if we could start with the slide deck real quick. Thank you. Once again, we want to really show our appreciation to all of our panelists today and appreciation to the organizations that they're coming from. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just as an introduction, some people may ask, why is the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions hosting this event today? And the reason that it caught our attention was this. We actually put out a survey to people on unemployment over the last couple of weeks. We had about 6,000 responses. And one of the overwhelming things that we found was that people are very, very worried and concerned about meeting their rent requirements or being able to pay their mortgage as the pandemic kind of drags on. That issue is further concretely looked at by the U.S. Legal Services Corporation, which shows that there's about 105,000 households here in New Mexico that might be at risk for eviction as we move through the pandemic. As many of you know, the last $600 weekly CARES Act payment was released to claimants at the end of July, and many of people used that money to help pay for their August rent. Know that we are working very hard. There is a new program called the Lost Wages Program. Unfortunately, it's not as much. It's about $300 per week. And our organization at Workforce Solution was the first state in the country to apply for that new program through the Federal Emergency Management Administration at the national level. And we're hoping to have those wages out, those benefits out in the next few weeks. We're not sure exactly what the date is yet, but we're working as fast as we can to get those out. That program is from the week ending August 1st through as many weeks as we have funding for. We don't know that yet, but if you are on unemployment and certifying for those weeks, we are working very hard to be able to get you that funding that is available under that program. The last thing I'll say before turning it over to Ms. Martinez from Community of Hope is that the time to start talking about assistance is as soon as you know that you're going to have an issue with your rent. As soon as you know you're going to miss a check, the time to start having a conversation about rental assistance, the time to start negotiating with your landlord is right away. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation right now over to Nicole Martinez, who I would like to say I have known for almost a decade. She is the director of the Mesilla Valley Community of Hope in Las Cruces and is one of the most experienced, knowledgeable people in the state regarding housing. So Nicole, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary McCamley. Good evening, everybody. Hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on some of the programs that are there to assist people as they are facing eviction or are precariously housed on the brink of homelessness during this pandemic. So I wanted to start off saying that I am familiar with the programs that are at the Community of Hope, but I'm going to give some broad information about areas in the state that might also have some of this funding and how you can reach out if you are in need. So first, I just want to touch on the CARES Act funding. And CARES stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And so there has been funding that's come through different channels that we've been able to utilize during this pandemic. One of those has been through the Community Development Block Grant that was distributed through our city municipality, who then reached out to some of the nonprofits who already had CDBG grants. So we did get an influx of assistance to help people that found themselves impacted by COVID with loss of income, needing assistance with ending their homelessness or preventing their homelessness, and also preparing for how to respond to the pandemic. Some of these are not affected by CARES Act funding, but might be available in your community. So I just, again, want to give this general overview so that you know when you're reaching out to agencies in your area to kind of ask about some of the funding that might be available to you and to verify if you are eligible for those programs. Another one is tenant-based rental assistance. And that one is also one that is funded through our city of Las Cruces here and is available throughout the state in other areas. Emergency Food and Shelter Program did have CARES Act funding, which we were able to apply for. So we received a general EFSP grant that helped us to help people end their homelessness and prevent homelessness. And then we got additional CARES Act funding through the Emergency Food Shelter Program, which is a federal grant. We also received Emergency Solutions Grant through the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. And our agency in particular has a grant through the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority that's called Rental Assistance Program. Basically, we call it RAP, and that provides funding for rapid rehousing people who are experiencing homelessness as well as homeless prevention. And the MFA is also supplementing that grant with CARES funding to respond to the pandemic. Department of Housing and Urban Development, waiting to see what CARES Act funding will be available there. They have implemented a lot of waivers in current programs. So again, it's good if you ask your community partners if they have funding available through Department of Housing and Urban Development if you are facing homelessness. Stacy, if you could move to the next slide, please. The Department of Veterans Affairs is offering the CARES Act funding that's eligible to veterans throughout New Mexico in the SSVF program. That's Supportive Services for Veteran Families program. And every county in New Mexico has access to supportive services for veteran families. And it's administered by 3 separate agencies throughout New Mexico. The Mesilla Valley Community of Hope, the agency which I'm at, covers Doña Ana County. And then through this map, you can see that the other counties are covered by either the Veterans Integration Center or Goodwill, New Mexico. And so they've made sure to have assistance in every county throughout New Mexico. And that's again for eligible veterans throughout our state. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit more information on the rental assistance program that is administered through the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority that goes to particular grantees. So we've all applied for this funding. And here are the agencies throughout New Mexico who do have this funding. Now this is just about, again, that RAP program, but many of these agencies that are on here have a lot of those other type of fundings that I mentioned before. So for example, the Community of Hope, we have RAP, homeless prevention funding, we have rapid rehousing funding, we have HUD funding, including TBRA and CDBG. So it's helpful to reach out to some of these agencies to see if any of those other funding agencies or if any of the other agencies have these funding sources or if they can refer you to the appropriate channels. Now on here, I do have director contact information, and you may or may not hear back from the director, but they will likely send it to the caseworker who's appropriate over that particular program. So for example, if you were to email me here from hope@zianet, I would make sure that I would get your information to the appropriate caseworker here at Community of Hope. And I would imagine that our partners would do that as well. Next slide, please. So how to get help? Well, I would encourage you to gather any eligibility criteria that you might need. And some of this will depend on the agency that you're working with. So it differs from agency to agency. Many of the grants will not differ because they are expected to be allocated in the manner in which the manual is created. But then there are also agency specific policies. So what I would suggest is making sure that whoever you're reaching out to, that you're asking what their eligibility criteria is for their programs. So it does depend on the funding source, and those requirements might be different. But some of the basic things that are really helpful if you are about to find yourself close to homelessness or an eviction, have your lease agreement ready so that the agency can verify that lease agreement and work with that landlord and reach out with that landlord. If you do have proof of income or loss of income, that's helpful for us to have on our file. and make a determination about the assistance needed. If you have that eviction notice or a 3-day notice, either of those would be helpful. Family documents can also be helpful. And by that, I mean, if you have, verification of family member identity, things like that, but they're not always required. It's just sometimes if you have that and it's part of your file, it gives a comprehensive picture, but again, not always required for the grants. Some it might be, or it might be an agency policy. So again, that's why it might be helpful in case a certain agency says that they need to have a social security card or birth certificate or an ID. And if you are lacking those things, then again, Community of Hope is an agency that can help you get those things in our area. And you might ask the partner agencies in your community if they can help you do that as well. That sometimes helps to speed up if you are looking to get another unit, because those things might be required from a landlord as well. So how long can you receive assistance and how much can an agency help? That is determined by the funder or the agency that's administering that assistance. And so your caseworker should be able to help you figure that out, how much assistance they can give. Unfortunately, funding is limited. We're trying to make the dollars go as far as we can, but hopefully we're able to instill that there is a response and that we need more action. We need more housing, but please reach out to us. And if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. And I am obviously staying on this call to answer any questions. And thank you again for letting me participate in this.
Thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate it. I just saw we got a quick question. Yes, this information will be public. We are recording it, and it will be on the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions YouTube site either later tonight or tomorrow, and we'll be sending out a press release with that information. So if you want to look at this again, please feel free to check this video out or share it with anybody moving forward. And I'd like to, at this time, turn the presentation over to Professor Serge Martinez from the UNM School of Law to talk about the eviction process and how to work with your landlord and then through that process. Professor Martinez?
Thanks, Secretary. I want to give you a heads up. I'm getting notices that my internet connection is unstable, so my apologies if I disappear. But you've alluded to it, and I've heard it before from lots of folks. But one of the keys to think about is if you're in a situation where you can't pay your rent, instead of saying, that's it, we're just going to get evicted, it's all over, right? Really, it's key and it's important to talk to your landlord about this. For the most part, the landlords are willing to listen and talk to folks. And what I hear from them anecdotally is that if someone will come and talk to them and be transparent and explain what's going on in their life, they're much more likely to talk to them and see if they can work out some sort of agreement that will allow the person to stay in the place, even though they're experiencing, financial issues that are causing them difficulties to pay the rent. But that only works, obviously, if you go and talk to the landlord about it. If you are, excuse me, if you wait till the very last minute, then, or wait till after the time has come to pay rent, the landlords are much less likely or have much less reason to want to talk to folks. And so, again, I can't say this enough. As soon as there's a situation where it's clear that you'll have trouble, the first thing you do is just start to talk to people and be open and transparent and explain what's going on. And there's no guarantees, and landlords are under no obligation to work out an agreement with you, but it's much more likely to happen if you go talk to them than if you don't. And so I would encourage everybody to do that. But even with the best will in the world, folks are finding that they can't pay the rent and they're not able to work something out with the landlord. Things do happen. So I get that it's not your fault if you can't make this work. But I do encourage everybody to try to do it and come up with ideas, be creative, say, here's what I can do, and here's what I'm thinking. And you're more likely to be able to work something out and hopefully avoid all of the trauma of eviction. Now that said, there are times when it doesn't work out, and I want to talk about what happens in that situation and what to expect and what you can do and how to respond in that if you're facing eviction. So can I get to the next slide? Great, thanks. So if you missed your rent, it has happened to lots and lots and lots of people, or is about to happen to lots and lots of people around the country and around the state. And we're expecting to see, unfortunately, to see larger numbers of this coming up as various sources of support evaporate or are diminished or become less accessible. So if you're in that situation, right, if you are in a situation of you can't pay your rent and your landlord can't work it out with you, there's a defined process and certain steps that have to happen, right? The first thing is, before anything happens, your landlord has to give you what's called a 3-day notice. And that is just what it says. It's a notice that you have 3 days to pay the rent. It's not an eviction notice, right? We regularly run into folks who say, well, I got this 3-day notice, so that means I'm evicted, right? No, that's not what that means. That means you have 3 days to come up with the money. And if you come up with the money that is owed within those 3 days and offer it to the landlord has to accept it. If you can't, so that's why it's important to be, to take action and scramble as needed if you're in that situation. You still have, if you're late, you still have the 3 days to come up with the rent. If you can't come up with the rent within 3 days, then the landlord is legally allowed to start the eviction process, right? They can file papers in court to try to evict you. But it's still a process. The landlord has to go through that process to evict you. They can't just decide on their own, I'm going to change the locks and kick you out. I'm declaring you to be evicted and our lease to be over, right? It has to go through the courts. So there's still time to try to work things out, or at a minimum to get things in order. So once you have reached the point where you've gone past the 3 days and been unable to pay it, and the landlord does decide to go to court to evict you, they go to court, they pay a fee to file the papers, and then they're required to give you notice of that, and you'll get it's just a piece of paper that says, this is the notice that you have there's a lawsuit filed against you and you have a hearing set for a certain date at a certain time. Can we get the next slide? Look at that. So the paper will also say why the landlord is trying to evict you, and you're entitled to a hearing, right? You're able to go to court and explain your situation. Now, there's a pandemic and a lot of places are not doing business as usual. The courts in New Mexico are still open. They're still doing hearings. Many of them are doing hearings by phone or by video. It's going to depend on where you are in the state and which court you're in, but there's, many courts are making it so you can appear without coming in person. And other courts are taking precautions. But no matter how the hearing is set up, whether video or audio or in person, you have to attend to raise your rights, to be able to explain to the court what you think your rights are and why you shouldn't be evicted or why you don't owe the money that is being owed. And to be able to raise those issues, though, you have to attend. If you don't go, there's a really good chance that you'll just get evicted without anybody ever hearing your story. So the one thing that I always stress is, don't just ignore it and hope that it will go away and get better. It will not. You have to go, you have to attend. It can be scary, obviously, to go to court, but it's intended to be accessible to folks who don't have lawyers. It's also, if you don't go, the court will almost certainly find against you, and you will get an order of eviction against you. When I talk about evictions, right, a lot of people recently have also said things like, but are they even doing evictions now? Didn't the Supreme Court say we don't have to, they're not doing evictions right now, that you can't evict people? And I want to clear up what that exactly means and how it works and how it doesn't work. Can we go to the next slide? So the Supreme Court of New Mexico at the end of March issued an order. They gave an order saying, we understand that there's a pandemic on, and so we're going to make it so fewer folks are actually getting physically evicted during the pandemic. So it doesn't apply automatically. It doesn't apply to everybody and every renter. And it doesn't mean that you won't get an order of eviction. It just means that as of right now, while this order is in place, if you qualify, the sheriff can't come to your house and physically remove you and your family from the apartment. But it doesn't mean that you can't get an order of eviction, and it doesn't apply to everyone, right? It only applies to folks who are being evicted for non-payment of rent and who can show the court that they are currently unable to pay the rent, right? So obviously it's hard to show the court that if you don't go. You have to show up in court to show them that you are not able to pay the rent. And like I said, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies in cases where you're being evicted for non-payment of rent. There are lots of other situations where you might be facing eviction. That could be if you're causing health and safety issues, or the landlord is accusing you of doing that. They still have to prove that in court. Or if you have a month-to-month lease that the landlord has decided to terminate, right? That is still a valid and a reason that you can get actually evicted from your home during the period that the Supreme Court order is in place. And like I said, I can't stress this enough. It doesn't mean you can't get an order of eviction against you. You still would have that and still be on your record. So it's really important to go and address these things. But even if you are in that situation, raising this, saying to the court, I can't pay my rent because I'm currently unable to, I'm in a financial hardship, the court is supposed to say, okay, I'm ordering the place restored to the landlord. I'm ordering that you're evicted, but I'm telling the sheriff that they can't do anything about it until the Supreme Court lifts the order that they've given. Right? We don't know when that will be. It's not permanent, though. It will end. And when that does happen, right, it'll go back to enforcement of all these orders, and people will start being able to be evicted. However, what it does do is buy some time. Right? So if you're in this situation and you get an order of eviction, but you've been able to successfully say to the court, I'm covered by the order of the Supreme Court, that gives you the chance to maybe go talk to the landlord again to try to work something out. A couple of the courts have mediation programs that can help folks in this situation, but even without that program, you are allowed to try to work something out because the landlord knows that as long as this stays there, they're not able to actually remove you physically. So it's an opportunity for folks to try to figure something out and avoid you having to be evicted and the landlord having to find new tenants and all the things that go with that. So my advice is to go to court to understand what the rules are here in this current situation, right? Different courts are handling it differently. Sometimes the judge will just ask, why can't you pay the rent? And you say, oh, I'm out of work. It doesn't have to be a COVID-19 related reason. You don't have to show that it's connected in any way to the pandemic. But the court may ask you, are you able to pay the rent? Some other courts have been asking for a little bit more information. So you might want to be prepared to show, bank accounts or whatever, to show that you are having income issues at the moment. It is obviously, being evicted is traumatic. It is a scary thing to hang over people's heads. And I encourage you, if you are in this situation, to understand how the process works and how you can, try to make sure that you're protected, but also to immediately start reaching out to all the folks that Nicole was talking about and any other sources, because they are out there, and we're hoping that there'll be more before the court lifts its order. But meanwhile, there's a little bit of time to try to scramble and make this all work. I think that's all I have on that slide, right?
Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate it. And so basically the final message before we go to Q&A is something that is really important for everybody all the time during this pandemic. Eventually, the solution to all this is to open up the economy and get more people back to jobs so they can earn an income and pay their rent. But to do that, we first need to get the virus under control and keep the virus under control. As we've seen from around the country, a lot of times when you quote unquote open back up, people stop wearing masks, they go to parties, they forget to wash their hands, all the things that you hear over and over and over and are probably sick of hearing by now. But these are the tools that we have to really stop the spread of the virus. So it is vitally, vitally important that everybody keep up the fight against COVID-19. Every time you're in public, please wear a mask. Please only go out when you have to. And that includes not going to like backyard barbecues. Please don't leave the state and come back without quarantine if you can. That's one of the ways that the virus spreads, especially with some of our neighboring states who haven't been kind of as strict in their COVID-19 rules, and that they're therefore seeing more cases. So if you could do these things, we literally, as the governor says, are all in this together. And the more we can do that, the more we open up the economy, get people back to work, and that will be the solution that we all want to get to. So I appreciate you all very much for your presentations. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there is a Q&A box on your Zoom channel. If you have a question and you want to ask it, please do so. If you have a specific question about your situation regarding your rents or mortgages, or whether you might be up for eviction, if you want to put your email in the Q&A, please not the chat, but the Q&A, it will stay private. And if we don't get to your question, we'll do the best we can to answer that. So let's start with these first. The first one, I believe, is for the Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor, what can MFA do to encourage individual housing authorities to participate in permanent supportive housing projects? This is housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and who have high barriers to maintaining housing.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you for the question. There's a couple things that can be done, and I think that there's going to be more discussion as we continue to navigate through this. But one of the first things that can be done is to continue to make our gap financing funds available. And I think that that's extremely helpful to make sure that we can help encourage for public supportive housing, to make sure that that's done for the permanent side as well. The other part that's actually going to come in front of us, and we're looking at October and November in the Mortgage Finance Authority Board meeting, is to look and see, to set aside, it's about 9% tax credit that's set aside for the permanent housing portion of it. And I think that this is their opportunity to weigh in on that and to make sure that board members understand the importance of that, because with that 9% tax credit, that's extremely beneficial, especially with the regional housing authorities that we want to work closely with.
Cool, thank you. The next question, maybe the next couple questions, are for me. Will the lost wages program, the one that's the $300 per week, require proof that employment was terminated or limited specifically because of COVID? I do have a letter from my manager stating that, but I'm curious because not everyone might. So as we read the rules for the lost wages program, it will require a separate acknowledgement that you are not employed because of COVID. It's a self-certification process. So we're not going to require any documentation for that, but you will be asked that when we get the program up and running on your weekly certification. And then the way we're planning on the program, you should just be able to get your money from there. The next one is probably for either Nicole or Serge. A lot of undocumented families are being evicted without due process, threatened by their immigration status. What can organizations working with them do to assure them that they will be protected? Are either of you comfortable taking that question?
I mean, I can address what the law says, right? Which is that, you know, the landlord-tenant law that I've described applies regardless of your immigration status. So there shouldn't be any issues with that. But I've heard, from many sources about folks who say, look, you know, you have to leave because of your immigration status, and we don't have to go through the procedures. And folks are justifiably concerned about that, and so they don't want to go to court and have that sort of contact, or they may not want to just, they may not feel that their rights would be protected and they have those concerns. So, I mean, there's no simple answer to that other than the organizations that work with folks really, I think, should recognize, that the law does offer those protections, but it's understandable that people are concerned about how they might apply in their individual situation. And it's just going to require, individual counseling and understanding the situation and the risks and concerns. But the law does not, on its face, discriminate between, people of different immigration statuses.
Nicole, is that something you had something to add?
In terms of undocumented families being evicted, not necessarily, but questions I'm sure about undocumented families and receiving assistance, and that's something that's a little out of our purview. But I know that at this point, it's my understanding the CARES Act isn't covering undocumented families, but I know specific agencies are trying to work to help people in other ways without by using funding sources that are allowable with people who are undocumented. So again, not necessarily within my purview to say what is allowed by the CARES Act or federal funding, but I do know that I can say that for our organization, if we do have funding that is allowable, then we are utilizing that funding.
Okay, thank you
And
both.
Secretary, if I
Please.
just may jump in there, as far as that goes on the undocumented aspect of it, the Mortgage Finance Authority has assisted some individuals who are undocumented who didn't get unemployment, and that was through our HSG trust fund. And so I just want to make people aware that there is some support that's out there through the MFA trust fund.
Excellent. Thanks to all three of you very much. The next question is to me. Many people's unemployment has been on hold for weeks. They don't know how to get information as the hotline is difficult to get through on. Are there common problems we can help people avoid? The biggest thing is to try to call on Thursdays and Fridays. A lot of things that we find at the unemployment office is that people get very, very concerned over the weekend, and everybody calls in on Monday, which is the same day that a lot of claimants call in to do their weekly certification. We encourage everyone to go online if they can. 95% of our claimants either apply online or do their certifications online. We've worked very, very hard to make our website easily usable. It has never gone down. And our YouTube site, the same place that you're going to find this video at youtube.com/NMDWS, you can find tutorials on how to both apply and certify for standard unemployment and for pandemic unemployment assistance. The other thing I would encourage people is to check their online correspondence. A lot of times they'll get notices from us that will let them know where their situation is and if our people need anything. Sometimes people call and call and call and they forget to check their online correspondence, and it can answer their questions for them. Next question, and this is probably either to Serge or Nicole. I am a caretaker of a 59-year-old lady. She can't work because of extreme vertigo. She filed for SED, but was denied. I'm assuming that's unemployment. She is waiting for her appeal. She receives food stamps, but is running out of money to pay for housing and utilities. The bank will foreclose on her house. She probably can apply for public housing, but still would have to pay utilities. What can I do to help her? Any programs out there? And this is a lady from Otero County. Nicole, is that something you might be able to talk about?
Yeah, so this it sounds like it's a mortgage instead of a rent. So that presents a different program that would be utilized to help. If I'm wrong on that, if the bank's foreclosing, again, that's why I would guess it's a mortgage. I know that the EFSP program will help with mortgage instances. Again, each agency would have to decide if the person meets all of the eligibility requirements for the EFSP program, but it would be worth trying to find out in your community who administers that and if there is funding for that from that community. And anywhere else, I think, in there to see if there are other options for assistance. If it is rent, then that's where it would get tricky with public housing then could help with rent. If she was able to get on them, there's a kind of a long waiting list, so that would probably be difficult. And I would say that in the interim, again, if it's rent, that should reach out to some of the agency providers in that community to see if they have any of the funding sources that I talked about, or any other supplemental funding sources. My list was not comprehensive. There's also linkages programs, and other types of, private donations that come to agencies where they have a lot more flexibility in assisting people. So I would say to reach out to the agencies in your community and see, depending on whether it's a rent or a mortgage, to see how they might assist her with that. And there's also utility assistance available as well. I know in our community, our city is helping with utilities right now. Some of our other grants, and then again, flexible donations that we've received or private foundation funding that we've received, and those might be available in other communities as well. And I know that some of the funding that we've received, especially from MFA and some of our other partners, have asked that we try to extend our reach to some of those white areas in our state that aren't being covered statewide by these programs. So even though it might seem pretty bare bones right now in some of those communities, heavily funded in Albuquerque for something like the rental assistance program, or Las Cruces, again, some of our agencies are trying to extend our reach. For our organization, we're trying to assist in Otero and Luna County right now as well.
Thank you. Serge or Governor, did you guys have anything to add to that?
No, regrettably, it highlights sort of the scarcity of the resources, or not the patchwork of resources that there are, and how hard it might be to cobble stuff together. So it's really important to just turn over every possible stone at the moment and address all the resources that we have, or access the resources that are out there. And it's it's hard out there.
Okay. So also, I just want to add one thing as well regarding utilities. I thought Nicole brought up a really important part. For utilities, most of the bigger utilities in the state currently have a moratorium on shutoffs because you can't pay your utility bill. So as an example, the Public Regulation Commission instituted in March a moratorium on electricity cutoffs. So no electric company in the state should be cutting you off because you can't pay your utility bill at that time. Some cities have as well. I know that both Santa Fe and Albuquerque have done those. The New Mexico Gas Company and the Albuquerque Water Authority both have those moratoriums. And as Nicole said, in the city of Las Cruces, there's actually a fund set up to help you pay your utilities, which is great because your bills aren't just simply adding up over time as you don't get shut off. You're actually paying them off over time. So that's really great. So if you have an issue with your utility payments, please understand to check with your utility provider. Most of them are probably going to have moratoriums on shutoffs, but I would check with your local city to see, or local provider for water and wastewater, that sort of thing, to see what kind of programs they have as well. Moving on to the next question. Hello, I am wanting to know what program I am qualified for. I am currently $4,000 behind on rent. May you please contact me. I've got that, and so we've got your email address and your phone. Do Serge or Nicole, it's kind of the same answer. Just check with your local providers on that, and we should get them that. Is that kind of where we're at? Yeah, okay. Let's see. What is and this one's to Serge. What is the legal process for tenants unable to pay due to COVID that are at the end of their lease? Is there any support or protection for landlords that do not want to renew that lease?
Not under the current stay that we've got, right? There's the stay is very narrowly tailored to situations where the landlord is trying to evict you for non-payment of rent. And so, yeah, that situation that the question is asked about is all too common, right? If the stay prevents you from evicting somebody, then it's, you can give them a 30-day notice that you're terminating a month-to-month lease, and it'll be terminated. And there's not much that can be done in terms of the protections that the Supreme Court has given, or any other sorts of stays or moratoriums right now. It's a gap in the protection that the law, or that the Supreme Court's order just doesn't cover.
Okay. Next question, Serge, might be for you as well. What if I only have half of the rent and can't come up with the rest of rent? What can happen to me?
So the law says that if you don't pay the whole rent, the landlord can give you your 3-day notice, and then they can take you to court to try to have you evicted for non-payment. That situation is not at all uncommon, what you're talking about. And the best that I can say is go talk, immediately try to talk to the landlord and see if you can work out a payment plan and say, look, I've got half and here's what's going on with me. If that doesn't work, then the law, the stay that I've discussed, the non-payment for non-payment of rent evictions would still apply for even paying a partial rent. But coming up with half the rent doesn't mean that the eviction process can't start.
Okay.
And that's when you should reach out to your local agencies to see if they can help with the rest of that rent.
Right. And I think that's the important one too. If you have an issue where you know you're only going to pay the rent, from what I'm hearing from you guys, ask now. Start talking with your landlord now. Start talking with your agencies now, right?
Right.
Okay. This one might be to Howie or Nicole. If someone is homeless in the Navajo Nation, can they still get help from the county?
That isn't something that I could answer, but I would suggest calling some of the agencies that are working with Navajo Nation to see, and depending on which county you're in, then MFA might be able to respond to that better than I.
Governor, is this something you might be able to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, thank you. And such an important topic as we've seen the impact on all of the states, but specifically in the Navajo Nation, what COVID has done. And we're glad to see that those numbers have improved and that they've taken measures to keep people safe in those areas. We want to make sure that all services and all available resources are there. And I do believe that communication with the county level is important. And I think with the regional aspect and the reaching out of that, and I know from commitment from the NMFA to continue to be supportive of those housing authorities to assist, whether it's within the city, within the county, to make sure that we take care of those New Mexicans who are living on those lands. I also want to make sure that we can also hear as well some more information, because this is a big part of it for me, being part of panels like this, is the amount of information that I'm able to take back, the questions that we're able to ask, and at times even to develop programs that may be specific to some of these questions. So in short, is just those should be available, and we encourage that they reach out. Again, we're here as a resource for Mortgage Finance Authority to assist and to be in communication with those counties and those local municipalities.
Thank you. So this one is either to Serge or Nicole. If you no longer have a lease and are now month to month, and the landlord accepted your late rent, do they still have to go to court to do an eviction?
So I'm wary of providing any sort of legal advice for someone's specific situation. So it's hard to say, but that would probably be something that if I were in court, that I would raise that, or reach out to legal aid or a legal service provider to ask that question, get specific advice about that question. But it's a particular situation that someone who knows all the details would probably have to be there to answer, unfortunately.
Okay. The next question is probably for Nicole. Where or who can be contacted in order to get help in the southeast area of the state with rent?
Again, it's going to depend on which area that is. And I don't want to have MFA be the response for everything, because there are a lot of agencies that are around and that are helping. But I do know that they are really good also at referrals. So referring to which agencies might be appropriate to contact in those areas. Like I said, MFA trying to make sure that some of those places that haven't historically been covered are now getting coverage by some of the agencies around. So if that's one that if you could still be anonymous, but somehow maybe restate the question and leave your contact information, that's something that we could get back to you on.
Okay, so if you want to leave your contact information with your specific question in the Q&A, we can hopefully find a provider and get back to you on that with that question.
And
Here's, oh, please,
Secretary,
Governor.
if I may, I just want to jump in because I know that New Mexico is a large state and there's many miles between different communities. Specifically in the Southeast region, I've found that we've had much success in reaching out to our congressional delegation. People like Beverly Allen working for Heinrich and Senator Heinrich and Senator Udall, as well as Congresswoman Xochitl Small. I think that they're resources that are really helpful, and I would start with them because they know what agencies and what programs could be of assistance to whatever those needs are. So I don't want to forget about the importance of our local congressional delegation and the importance that they have to making sure you're connected to the right services throughout the state.
Excellent. And Lieutenant Governor, while I have you, there are numerous questions regarding funding for housing programs. I know we don't want to get into specifics, but would you be able to talk about kind of the process there and what the discussions are going on regarding that situation?
Yeah, absolutely, Secretary. And I appreciate the questions because that's going to be helpful in formulating how we can have responses to these. There's several funding opportunities. I mean, there's funding opportunities, whether you're a service person, maybe in law enforcement, maybe in fire, maybe a teacher, just some of the examples of some of the funding that may be available through the Mortgage Finance Authority. There's other funds that are available through USDA and other funds that may be available through HUD and through other type of programs. So there's so many that are out there that are beneficial. And I think that that's been one of the areas that I've wanted to focus on along with my board members on MFA is to make sure that we can get awareness out there to the public. The best resource that I can give, because there's so many individual needs, but there's so many programs that are out there, is going to housingnm.org. That is going to be the website that'll lead you to the direction of specific funds that may be available and beneficial to families in getting that home ownership.
Okay. This is one that is interesting. And Nicole, this one might be for you. If someone gets evicted, but still wants to vote in November presidential election, is there a way for them to re-register to vote when they do not have an address?
What a great question. What we have done, so we help people register for vote here at Community of Hope, and they use our address because we are a homeless service center. And so I would hope that throughout the state that there are agencies that are homeless shelters that allow people experiencing homelessness to use their address if that is a place where they are receiving most of their services and getting most of their needs met. But in terms of what that looks like in each community, I'm not sure who is helping in each community for people to re-register with that address. But again, I know here in our community that absolutely we could help people re-register quickly. We have internet access, and again, we have mail services here for people experiencing homelessness, and so that we're able to provide an address for them.
Thank you so much for that. There's a couple more general unemployment questions. The first is regarding the lost wages program. So as we've said, the state of New Mexico will be using current unemployment dispersals to meet the 25% portion of the program that the federal government is requiring. So that will mean that people will get, if they have certified 4 weeks, they'll get $300 extra per week for the weeks that are eligible, and then we get money from the feds for. The second question regarding that is, if I'm running out of my eligibility, will I still get the $300? The answer is, first off, if you're running out of initial eligibility, you should be able to apply for what is called pandemic extended unemployment compensation. So you should get another 13 weeks of eligibility with that. If you get done with that, you should be able to go to an extended benefits program. So every time you run out of one of these programs, please go to your online site at jobs.state.nm.us, log in, hit apply for benefits. There should be a very short form for you to fill out, and you can go right into the next program. And the other question is, if you have certified for the weeks ending in August 1st, and then for however many more weeks we are allowed to give this money for, you are already in that program and you should be able to get dispersals there once we get the money out. Okay, let's go to the next question. I have been homeless for 2 months now. I am still working, but have had a loss in pay. I did not meet eligibility for unemployment and have had difficulty in reaching programs because many are not being manned. I have an issue with getting into a home because rents have skyrocketed and many apartments have a waiting list. Does anyone have any suggestions? Nicole, we might want to start with you. I know this is your specialty.
Sure. So my suggestion again would be to reach out to the agencies that are providing rental assistance, because the caseworkers have the expertise and knowledge of landlords that do meet the criteria for subsidized housing. Hopefully there is assistance in your community. Without knowing that makes it kind of hard to know that answer, but I know that if you are in a community that has some of those subsidy programs, that reaching out, they should be able to help you navigate finding a place that doesn't have a rent that doesn't meet the definition of affordability, and finding apartments where they have already established relationships with landlords to streamline that effort. That would be my suggestion, is reaching out in your community to housing providers.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor, I know you've got to take off at 6:30, and so let me get this question to you. Tax credits only work if the housing authority agrees to project base vouchers. So our region will never be able to compile a competitive allocation for 9% tax credits because the housing authority said no in Grant and Luna County, and whatever other counties are served by the Western Regional Office. Can the MFA look at making it a priority at the local level?
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. And I appreciate that question because I think it goes along to the discussion of what the board will be taking up in either October or November, specifically in reaching out with us regional housing authorities and making sure that we're able to work together to ensure that those tax credits are going to be beneficial. Again, the input that we get from meetings like this is helpful as we make decisions to make that a priority. I did receive a text from our head of our mortgage finance authority, who is Izzy Hernandez, and he's made a commitment for MFA to work together with those housing authorities to do exactly that. So I appreciate that. I also want to say, Secretary, just a couple things, if I may, in regards to voting. I used to be a county clerk, so I appreciate the question about that. I would want to make sure that people realize that even if they're evicted, they're still registered under that address. If they want to update it, to go to their county clerk's office and make sure that you can do so whatever address that it's used. But most importantly, that you know that you are registered to vote. If you've done it within the timeline, and I know there was changes this last special session to the election process, visit with them to make sure that your vote is counted. I also would want to just reach out and say thank you to communication that we've had on all levels, and including our renters, our landlords, the associations that have been part of that, because they see the impact and they see that they have some concerns as well. So when we talk about funding that's necessary, it's important that we keep that part of it there, because their mortgages still will have to be paid, but even more so that impact of property taxes that are used for services within local communities. And you can see how the cycle can continue. So I want to make sure that we recognize that we're all in this together, and it takes every single one of us having input from each side to make sure that we come up with the best possible solutions. And then the last thing that I just want to remind everyone before I have to get off is just want to make sure that people register for the census, that they make sure that they get counted, because these are exactly the programs that we benefit from to help more New Mexicans if we have an accurate count. So it's extremely important that if you haven't done so, that you be counted, because I believe that there's been some moving around of the dates, but I believe September 30th is one of the moving dates that was put in as a deadline. Please do so, because we want to make sure and help people by receiving the funding that is needed in New Mexico. So Secretary, thank you. Serge, thank you for your work. Stacy and Nicole and all those who have taken part in this wonderful panel.
And Lieutenant Governor, thank you very much. Just before you take off, there are a lot of questions about CARES Act funding. I'm wondering if you wanted to kind of address that and kind of the process moving forward. I know discussions are still going on. Is there a possibility of giving people just a description of where those are?
Yeah, with the CARES Act funding, as we talked about earlier, what that actually means and how that's done. I know that we're working through that with MFA, wanting to make, I believe, between 11 or 12 million available for assistance. These are the type of things that we're still needing some guidance from the federal side of it, because there are some details that are attached to that, and we want to make sure that we're carrying out those in a responsible way, that we don't come back and that we didn't expend those funds the way that they should have been or were intended to do so. But again, we do know that there's funding coming in, and it's important that those funds that come in go specifically for the needs of housing, whether it's rental assistance or whether it's permanent housing, that we make sure that we utilize those. So I appreciate that question. I wish I had more solid answers on that, but we're watching closely what's happening at the federal level to ensure that we can deliver that.
And to discuss that further, we here at Unemployment have to be very, very careful with new programs that we are dotting our I's and crossing our T's with federal funding. If you do it the wrong way, they can either penalize you or stop you from getting money in the future. And that's why it's vitally, vitally important that with a lot of these new programs, we fully understand as much as we can the nuts and bolts and rules of all those programs. So Lieutenant Governor, thank you very, very much for your time. I know you had to take off. I just had one more unemployment question, and I think we might have gotten everything. I am not currently employed directly due to COVID-19, but right now I'm being highly advised by my doctor to not find work due to COVID-19, me being very high risk medically. Will I qualify for $300 unemployment for this reason? The answer is yes. If you are on unemployment and an employer challenges your claim because they say, I offered you a job, if you show medical documentation from a doctor saying you are at a high risk for COVID, and I think there's 7 or 8 different medical conditions which the state epidemiologist has put out, including severe asthma, you're a cancer patient, risk because of HIV, those sorts of things, then you can show that in case you are challenged, and you should be able to stay as qualified for unemployment. We did have that follow-up question regarding the PEUC, the extended benefits. In normal unemployment, you get 26 weeks of benefits. Currently, if you run out of those weeks, you get rolled over to a 13-week program called the Pandemic Extended Unemployment Compensation Program, which is basically the same for you. Once you fill out a little form, you're just funded by the federal government and not our state account. And then you can actually run to another 13 weeks of the regular extended benefits program, which kicked in because New Mexico hit certain unemployment levels in June, higher ones. So you should be able to get another 26 weeks total of federal benefits moving forward there. So that's all the questions we have. We appreciate those of you that have specific questions. We have documented your emails. We'll work through them and try to get back to you with some answers. Surgeon Nicole, did you have any final comments as we wrap this thing up?
I'll let Nicole go.
Thank you. Again, I just wanted to thank you for an opportunity to share some of the information about options that people might have, and that obviously there's still some gaps, things that we need to work on, especially bringing in some more homeless prevention funding as I think a lot more people are going to be impacted in the future. But we appreciate the opportunity to try to help our community and statewide as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you everybody very much for attending this. Thank you so much to the Lieutenant Governor and also to Nicole and Serge for making the time today. This is really beneficial. Once again, this will be up tomorrow on the YouTube site for New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions, which is youtube.com/NMDWS. And so if you know of anybody that might benefit from this information, please feel free to pass it along for them. We're all in this together. Please wear a mask. Please socially distance. Please stay safe. And I hope everyone has a really, really good night.
Thanks, Bill. Or Secretary.